Welcome to Game Retail Ramblings, episode number 31. I'm your host, Travis Severance. We're going to be talking today about CCGs and more specifically what I need as a retailer to be successful with CCGs. Given how competitive, how widespread, how wild the marketplace is right now, I thought that this would be a good time to sort of have a conversation with publishers, and retailers are welcome to chime in and disagree and give feedback for what works for them as well. Make sure you're down in the comments doing that. Just a quick shout out and appreciation to everybody that liked and subscribed last video. I know it's been a couple of weeks. This time of year as a retailer is fairly busy. It's double busy when you have two stores that you sort of manage. So I spent most of last week in Minnesota with the people at Game Center. Ended up doing back-to-back holiday parties, so I need to get out and do some jogging. Fortunately, there's not a lot of snow around here and it's not that cold, so I can get out and do that. Next week, we're probably not live, and part of the reason why we're not live is we're a week away from Christmas. So as you can probably guess, the registers have been really busy. My ordering has been significant, and sales have been pretty good for this December. We came out of the two for both businesses. I had the most successful Novembers in the history of either business, so that was a pretty good month for both businesses. Things are going really well on that front, so it seems like consumer shopping is doing really well. The odd thing about it to me as a retailer is that I don't have anything that's the must-get game or product or that sort of thing, so it's a little bit of everything. There's no sort of lightning rod gift or board game or thing that everybody has to have that's on the shelf right now. There's just sort of a smattering of everything, so it's been a pretty widespread mixture of what people are buying. But today, again, we're going to talk about CCGs. So I've been selling card games for a little over 20 years. I started playing in 1994, so I've been playing for quite a while myself as a consumer. About a third of the revenue for Millennium Games comes from, a little over a third of all revenue that we have generated comes from CCGs, CCG products, and events. If I were to lean in a little bit more and talk about supplies, it'd probably be even more than that. I spoke a couple of shows ago. We actively sell 14 to 16 different CCGs at this point. All of them don't get shelf space. Some of them are just, there's a select number of customers that they may want Weiss, they may want Final Fantasy, they may want some specific games, and we'll order it by the case for them, but we don't really stock those widespread. The games that are behind me today are the stuff that we lean into. We sell singles for most of the stuff that you see behind me in terms of products. We definitely host events for all of them. There isn't a CCG that I think I have on the shelf right now that I don't host events for other than Dragon Ball Fusion, which we hosted events early on. We're a couple of sets in. It's certainly not having the same amount of luster that the last incarnation of Dragon Ball had. So we haven't run events for a couple of months for that game, but everything else that's behind me, we run events for and we actively play here. I'm going to go through, I basically got 6 different talking points that I want to talk to potential publishers, current publishers, past publishers, different things that I've experienced as a retailer that are things that sort of I need to have in order for me to be successful with the CCG. And there's a couple of different phases of CCGs. There's the, what are you doing to make it important and relevant so that I want to bring the game in? It's how do you foster growth while you have it built? And then what do you do long term to sort of engage that community? So I'm going to get into each of these different topics. I'm going to skip how to make a good game. This isn't a game design podcast. I could certainly talk about strengths and weaknesses of different card games that I sell. I have a whole ton of opinions, but maybe at some point we'll do a ranking system on which games I feel like are the best designed games. Part of the reason why I don't want to get into game design today is this is more of a product talk and talking about product and life cycle and building something that sells. And what I found is I sell a whole ton of card games that I don't necessarily love or like the design or feel like they're good games in any way, but they continue to sell, they continue to have a fan base, they continue to do a lot of the things on the list here that I have. So it keeps people buying the game, it keeps the game selling, the singles, the sealed market ends up being significant for them. They end up having ways to make events robust, and typically the recruitment tools are pretty strong as well. And whether that's because the game is easy to play or easy to understand, or it has a robust IP that people have a huge fandom for, and they get to play that out on a card table. There's a whole bunch of reasons why a game that I would consider not a great card game ends up still selling well for us. 6 sections. We're going to start with product simplicity and structure. What I mean by that is how easy is it for the consumer and the retailer to understand what a product on the shelf is and what it does. So the bare bones basics of this is basically a booster box with booster packs, and a starter deck. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do starter decks. I talked about, the things that I enjoyed Magic sort of doing in this new run with their foundation stuff, and how they're actually leaning into the game a little bit more. And their starter products are more in line with what the actual game experience that people are going to play is. There's a lot of times when publishers will fall into this trap of having a game that's complex. So what they do is they strip down what the starter experience is to what they think that the consumer on the other end can handle for the game. To me, that intro experience, that demo deck experience, that is sort of the thing that you want to see before a game launches. When a game launches, I want a starter deck that's going to at least give enough of the framework for the game for people to be able to look at the game, understand what it's about, either enjoy that section of the game or that segment of the game that the starter deck was built around, or be able to flip to another one to try out a different experience and find out if the play patterns of another deck are good. What I see on the marketplace a lot of times is I can blame Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic a little bit because they're the oldest in the product line as far as CCGs go. They have all kinds of wacky, weird products. One of the best-selling products for Magic for me, it was formerly called a Fat Pack. It's now called a bundle. It's basically just this box of stuff. When I say stuff, I mean stuff. It's a box. There's a die in there, or maybe there's not a die anymore. There's some land. There's been all kinds of different contents that's been in there, but it's 6 to 8 packs. There's not much of anything that you can do with 6 to 8 packs in Magic. You can't build a deck out of it. You can play a sealed pool out of it, I guess. You can do a draft out of it, or a 2-player draft, but it's not going to be enough to build you competitive deck or something that you're going to play in a constructible deck experience. So it's one of those things where we sell a ton of them. There's a limited amount of them that get printed. I'm sure the cost isn't as good for Wizards to print those as it would be to just sell you booster packs and booster boxes, but the popularity then makes it so that they print so many of them and it's limited. And I have some customers that come in and buy every one. So they must have calyx shelves or spaces in their closet where it's just stacks and stacks and stacks of these empty boxes with some sort of visual artwork on it, and it sells despite the fact that as a product it's not a great product. It has a nice look, it works from the standpoint of this time of year we sell a whole ton of those because it's a nice wrappable thing. It's like 40 or 50 bucks, so it's a nice thing to throw under the Christmas tree and that sort of stuff. It's kind of a brainless buy in that you don't have to have a lot of thought about whether or not the Magic player that you're buying it for has that set, because it doesn't matter. It's collectible packs on the inside. And then when you go out a little bit further, Pokemon sort of has the same thing. They have Elite Trainer boxes, which are basically the same idea. It's not a playable, you're not getting a playable experience out of the box, but the box is nice and it's designed nice. And during COVID we sold a whole ton of them, and part of the reason why is a bunch of people were doing box breaks, and the background with the ETBs looked really nice. So the cost of some ETBs are just out of control, and it has very little to do with what's in the product itself and more to do with the way that the product looks and that sort of thing. So you can get away with things like that if you've got a 20, 30-year run in the industry. If you're brand new and you're starting out, simplicity is pretty important. I've seen Star Wars Unlimited is starting to lean into some other products and things like that. I'm sure that's pressure from the publisher itself to say, okay, we need more releases, or we need more launches, or we need other SKUs in this line to make this thing go. But making sure that the customer and the retailer understands what the product is and what the product's supposed to do is super critical for that. And they should also come with some logical pricing tiers. Like, if your starter product costs so much more than what anybody else is doing in the marketplace, you might want to consider what you're looking to do with that particular product itself. If you're above $30, or if you're getting yourself where the starter product is close to what an actual board game would cost for 4 players to sit down and play and have a good time for hours on end, then maybe your starter product is a little bit misaligned with the reality of what it should be. So a starter product should be a good entry point. I think it should have a good representation of what the actual gameplay experience and the play patterns of that game are going to be like. And it should not necessarily be something that you can grab and go and put into a tournament, but it should be good enough where that if you take it to a retailer that sells singles, or you look for yourself online, they should be able to take the framework of the skeleton, the body of that product, and be able to build it up with some single cards around the outside of it. Intelligent publishers will include sort of a pamphlet on the inside that says, if you'd like to take this deck in a different direction, feel free to add these singles or these singles, and it sort of gives a roadmap for the player to be able to take the deck and move it in whatever direction they want. There's some extra work that needs to be done there. Foundations has done a really nice job of sort of simplifying that sort of thing for players that are now getting into Magic, but most places don't take the time to do that. In fact, the Armory starter deck that I have that's over here for Flesh and Blood. Great tournament deck, insane value. It's a brand new hero and things like that. But if you open it up, it's assumed that you know how to play the game. It's called an Armory deck. It's not called a starter deck. It's built to go right into a tournament and play. There's no rules on the inside of it. There's no real tokens. There's no way to keep track of your life inside of it, but it's a deck that's ready to go. Now, there's a handful of publishers that do those decks as well. You really need to watch yourself in terms of what you're doing there, because tournament competitive playable can change pretty quickly. So that level of confusion for a customer, assuming that one experience is going to be the same, is a hard thing to do. So make sure that you handle that the best that you can. Also make sure that the retailer knows the difference between the products and stuff. So the launch for Foundations was a little bit confusing. There's a product called Jumpstart Foundations, and the Jumpstart cards that were in Jumpstart Foundations couldn't be used with the rest of the cards in Foundation, and it was just unneededly confusing for a whole bunch of people. And that happens from time to time when you have products that are meant for different cycles and different ways to play the game. If it's not obvious to the retailer, then it's definitely not going to be obvious to the consumer, and it just makes it a lot harder conversation to be able to have, and to have them try to understand why they can't play certain things in certain formats and stuff is another hurdle that you're doing that's going to shut some of that stuff down. Product saturation is the other thing, the last thing that I'll talk about, and product simplicity and structure. I think if we look at the total number of products on the CCG market right now, it's pretty wide. I think it's one of those things where it's really, really difficult for most retailers to be able to follow the bouncing ball of all the different products that we're carrying. It's hard to do if you don't have a lot of play space. And what typically happens is the retailers are going to go to A, what the largest community is, and B, what the easiest to sell is, because we don't have a lot of time and a lot of energy to foster a bunch of work or put a bunch of effort into communities that are harder to grow. And when we look at product saturation and buying opportunities and how much we have to keep up with the products that's coming out, if you're jamming something down our throat every single month for the player base, not only are they going to get wallet fatigue, we're going to get bank account fatigue as well. And capital is something that obviously is going to be it's going to be different for every retail store, but if you're just ramming stuff down their throat constantly, it ends up being difficult for you to retain a consistent community by doing that. And it can get into a point where if the card game and the community itself is not big enough to have a wide enough player base to be able to handle that sort of thing, players will start to back off. So be conscious of product saturation. Number 2 is strong organized play support. Organized play support is super critical for us. Being able to take these games, introduce people to the games, have events for them weekly and monthly, have aspirational events, being able to host them inside of the store. It helps us with all sorts of things. It means that they're here consistently. So if they're here consistently playing, a lot of times that this ends up being the place that they're going to be buying from as well, which is critical to us. It also makes our singles community hum as well, between players being able to trade amongst themselves, also us being able to do acquisition and sales of those singles and things. So if you're a collectible game and you want players to continue to play the game, then you need to have a strong organized play setup for retailers to be able to take advantage of. It starts with game launch. Some places do great game launch, other places are pretty bad at it. So if I take a look at what Alter did and what Star Wars Unlimited did, and the roadmap and the time frame that they did with their learn to play experiences, they did a pretty nice job. And the year before that, I would say probably the most robust launch plans that I'd ever seen was Battle Spirits from Bandai. Now, the game crashed and burned for a lot of different reasons, but they had like a 6-month calendar of all these little nuggets of stuff that they were giving stores and they were giving players to be able to use to sort of build this momentum up to this big launch thing. And then they scooped us on the Las Vegas event. So I don't understand why they did that. But if I look at the roadmap of the way they had the 6 months planned, the first thing was sort of these trial decks that were free to stores that wanted to participate, that we used to be able to show people and demo the game. And then afterwards we could give them the decks to play. And it also allowed us the opportunity to teach our staff how to play the game for those people that were interested. There was some like alternate foil stuff in there that you couldn't get any other way. So there was a collectible element to that, and it didn't cost anything. All you had to do was sign up. There were some videos that went along with it. There was a rule book that was inside of it. There was a play mat that was built so that you could understand where your cards were supposed to go on the field and that sort of thing. Really, really nice job. Some companies get around that and they allow for print and play. It's much easier to have a physical deck ahead of time for us to be able to use and utilize, to be able to train employees and to be able to show customers what it's like. And one of the things that's critical about that is basically what we're doing is we're pre-recruiting at that point, and we are not only are we helping the hype as far as the marketing goes for you and your game, but we're also figuring out who in our community currently wants to play this game. We're marketing and we are soliciting folks from all over the place locally to have them come in at very specific times to play the game. And what it does is it allows me to forecast how much product I need a lot better. And that's gonna change. It's gonna vary from store to store, community to community. But it's an interest point that you don't normally have if you're just gonna drop a set on top of me and then I just have no idea what my player base is gonna be like, or I have to do all of that work myself. So having opportunities for recruitment is pretty critical. And I'm gonna take that a step further and say that most of the time now, when a product launches or a new CCG comes out, most people do a very good job early on because they understand that point of, let's build that community up. Let's make sure that the retailers have the tools that they need to introduce people to the game before they have to make purchasing decisions or anything like that. Where they fail, though, I feel like, is we get into the tail end of year 1 or year 2 or year 3, and the recruitment efforts on the publisher side, whether it's a lack of marketing, a lack of continuation, a lack of product construction, they just stop the recruitment effort, or their recruitment is trying to, they try to recruit, or they try to continue to raise capital by just increasing the number of products that are in the product catalog from month to month, as opposed to trying to make efforts to continue to bring in new customers. The other thing that happens too is 18 to 20% of retail stores every single year cancel, and there's a whole bunch of them that get flipped and turned back on. So as a publisher, about 20% of the retailers in the country are coming in and they haven't been in business for a year. So you have another opportunity if you're at trade shows or if you're spending time with retailers where you can get them on board and you can launch them and launch brand new communities where maybe you're in an area that they didn't have before. But if you don't have a launch kit that's topical or relevant set up to be able to do that, you don't have intro decks that work for those retailers that are curious about it and that sort of thing, being able to bring in new players gets harder and harder and harder. And if you're just continuing along the path of, as a game matures, the power level creeps up a little bit, the difficulty of the game creeps up a little bit. If you take a look at all the different things that Yu-Gi-Oh does now compared to where it was with Blue Eyes White Dragon, the game is significantly more technical. There's a lot more aspects of it and different fields to it than when it was originally. So that game ends up being a challenge trying to recruit because of the technical aspects of that game, and because there's not really a product that's built to be able to onboard a customer and get them anywhere as close to what the reality of what they're going to see in a regular weekly tournament. Keep that in mind as you get seasoned and as your game continues to mature. You still want to be able to bring in new players. You still want to be able to bring in new retailers. So there's a product that needs to be in there, on an annual basis. This is our very clear recruitment tool that we can use for you guys to be able to attract new players and to give them enough of the game where it doesn't feel like they're going from that first game, intro game, to a completely new game when they play their second game with a little bit more tuned deck. If there's a huge gap between that, take a look at what you're doing in the intro product, because if you water down the intro product too much and it's not in line with what the actual game experience is going to be, they're going to feel like you did a bait and switch. Like you didn't give them enough complexity. Now, the benefit to all these CCGs being in the market at this point is the fact that there's a ton of people that understand card games on a fundamental level. They understand rarities, they understand product types, they understand different things like that. They understand play patterns and mechanisms and all kinds of stuff. So you can lean into the fact that the products now can be a little bit more complicated because the player acumen level has matured a little bit. That's not to say that we still don't have a ton of people that we haven't brought into the CCG market, but from the standpoint of being able to sell some games that are a little bit more difficult, I think we're at a place where we can sort of do that now. Organized play support, event kits, weekly event kits, monthly event kits, aspirational play, store championships, that sort of thing. Qualifiers for regional events or larger events that are national events or international events. Those are super important. Promos that you can only get on your pre-release when you're here in store. The other thing too is to a pre-release. If you're a card game right now and you're not doing pre-releases, you are missing an opportunity. Pre-release is a very standard thing that's just a way to get together to play with the new cards ahead of time. It allows us a whole bunch of opportunity to harvest new orders during that period of time before the actual product comes in. You get this quick release of that game, and the dopamine's there, and people get excited about the set and so on and so forth. So as part of that store organized play support, make sure that pre-release is part of what you're doing. If it's not, you should restructure in a way where you figure out how to do pre-releases, because it's just a standard thing that any CCG that matters does. And if you're not doing it, you should evaluate how you're doing things and look at doing those things. Number 3 is retailer margins and support. We need healthy profit margins in order to make things work. Now, collectible products, due to their very nature, are going to be market priced most of the time. They're going to fluctuate based on supply and demand, so they're going to sort of ebb and flow. It's not the same as like a standardized board game or anything like that, or a role-playing book, that sort of thing. But if you start out from the premise of you're only giving me 35% off your MSRP, like Lorcana does, then I'm already at a 15% deficit from what I can do there. So your sales velocity better be insane for me to want to continue carrying that product at an additional cost that we have to deal with every single time that something comes out, versus your peers that we're not dealing with that. Now, Magic has recently gone away from net pricing to MSRP again. I didn't notice any big change when that happened. It's confusing to me why they decided to do that, but they got a nice response in Vegas when they announced that it was going to happen. So I'm sure we will deal with this until, I don't know, the next regime decides that they want to switch it over and do that sort of thing. Low buy-in is also another thing that's pretty critical. If you're a new card game or you're starting out, you need to have some sort of a retail package that's attractive to somebody that doesn't have a ton of money, so that they can bring that into their store to try to see if they can build a community out of it. If it's a high price point thing that they have to get themselves into, it's going to be a lot more challenging to get in those doors, because there's a lot of effort and there's a lot of work that goes into carrying a CCG, fostering a community for CCGs, hosting those events, and then being up on every single product, given how many products launch for a lot of these successful CCGs. Anything that can help as far as exclusive retail opportunities, where either it's an event type that can only be hosted here and it's not something you're doing on a digital platform, or if there's a card that's aesthetic, that's unique to whatever the event is that we're having, that obviously drives a bunch of people into the store as well. A lot of the things that people do that are successful right now is they have seasonal packs that we are allowed to give out, and only retail stores that are running official tournaments can do those things. They've worked out incredibly well. There's a lot of different card games right now are utilizing that sort of format. Yu-Gi-Oh did it very early on. Bandai has done those as well. Flesh and Blood is starting that out with their new gem packs, which I'm pretty excited about. I think the biggest difference between what Yu-Gi-Oh and what Flesh and Blood and what Star Wars Unlimited do versus what Bandai does is Bandai's packs have mechanically unique cards. Now, mechanically unique cards, UVS used to do mechanically unique cards in the League packs as well. Mechanically unique cards are a hell of a driver to get players to come into the store if they're into the game, but it can be a real feels bad on the other side of that, because there's a rush to get those cards because those cards are playable. And if one of those cards is really strong and the only way to get it is through those packs, it creates this massive tension and this huge pressure. And retailers are selling the packs online rather than utilizing them as promo pieces like they should for their events and things like that. It creates this real issue. That's not to say that they don't do that with the aesthetics packs, but I think from a safety standpoint and an ease, it's much easier and much nicer for us when we're dealing with cards that have just a different aesthetic, a different frame, a different foiling, a different rarity. That sort of thing works better for us as far as what we're doing, because it keeps it more of a casual thing. And what we're looking for on our weekly events in most cases is casual, unless we're playing for a bigger tournament or it's an event that kind of leans into something that's more aspirational play. Having packs of cards that are mechanically unique sort of brings out the worst when it comes to people and their results and their events and things like that. League packs are really important. I think they do a great job of giving us something that we can hand to every single person when they come in and they can participate with. So it feels like regardless of how they went in the tournament, at least they might have gotten something fun in that pack, or occasionally they get something that's a $75 card and they showed up and they played for $10. It's a pretty good return on investment for them. Retail margins and support is super critical for us. Number 4, and I'm going to whip through this, is product longevity and sustainability. So what I want to talk about there is, at some point, you probably need to look at rotation or reprints, or both. Make sure that you are trying to develop as healthy of a player experience with the meta for your particular game as you can with those products. reprints too hot, too heavy, end up just completely trashing the market for the people that bought in early on. If you're rotating too soon, then people don't feel like they're getting the value out of the product that they would have gotten normally. If you're rotating too late, then you've got a card pool that's too wide and too expansive. And one of two things usually happens there. There's a very best deck that's always there to deal with, or the meta is so wide that it doesn't matter what you play because there's paper, rock, scissors that's built into it, but you've got 19 decks that you need to deal with, so that it doesn't feel like there's any real player agency there. Be cautious. Reprints and rotations are super critical. I think being able to take some cards that are really hard to get if you're making your collectible structure good inside of your game itself and allowing another opportunity to buy them with maybe a different frame or a different treatment is important if the game is going to have, no real rotation built into it from a timeline standpoint, going back and recreating core sets and that sort of thing. It also allows you to sort of trim down problem cards or avoid power creep too. So be conscious about the way that you're going to handle reprints and rotations. And if you're going into a game and you're making a CCG for the first time, or you're making this CCG for the first time, you should assume that you're going to be successful with it. Consistent release cycles is another thing. And what I mean by that is not what I was talking about with product saturation, but what I'm talking about now is a player for your game should understand the cadence of purchasing patterns, whether that's a 3-month purchasing pattern or a 4-month purchasing pattern inside of a year. You should have some plan. They should have an idea of what the roadmap looks like and how that's going to come out. Not only does it help the customer, but it helps the retailer as well as far as planning how we're going to do things and manage our finances and that sort of stuff. We also there's a ton of us that have back ends that deal with singles and that sort of thing. And knowing when the boxes are going to arrive and the cadence of that means that we can plan a workforce to be able to shred that stuff, sort that stuff, get the stuff ready to go for the customers as fast as possible. Making sure that you're supporting casual play in the middle of those adjustments is really important as well. Number 5 is marketing support from the publishers. In-store marketing is great. So poster standees, demo kits. I need all of those things. If we can get non-foldable posters, that's great. Posters in a tube is what I'm looking for here. I want something that I can be able to put in a frame and be able to hang up inside of the play space a little bit so that it makes it look nice to the players that are coming in. If it's folded and stuff like that, it goes in the garbage. I'm just not putting something that's folded up on the side of my wall. I'd rather you send me the PDF at that point and I'll print it out myself. As far as marketing goes, it's important to be able to have the ability to talk to players in a couple of different ways. Talk to them about your big national events, talk to them about your local event circle, talk to them new products that are coming out. Continually hitting that a little bit and getting outside of what your comfort zone is important. I see a lot of publishers market to the same segment of people in the same ways all the time. We don't get outside of that very often. I think there's a lot of places that we could touch people, whether it's pop culture conventions or different things like that, where we can get a little bit wider and grab some more people in. And I wish some publishers did more of that. And then finally, number 6 is avoid direct competition. It is really difficult for me as a retailer to sell your products if you are selling them lower than I can sell your products. That's fairly basic. I'm doing a whole bunch of legwork. I'm running demos. I'm selling singles. I'm hosting events. I'm bringing people in. I'm promoting your game. I'm buying your booster boxes. I'm training my staff. I'm doing everything that I can with that to build your brand. If you're undercutting my product pricing and selling in a way that I can't, or in an unfair way where you're selling a product that I also don't have access to, please stop. We're supposed to be in a partnership. We're trying to build this thing together. We're trying to go down the same road where we continue to entertain these people the best that we can with the product that you're creating and stuff. And if you've decided that you're going to put in exclusive selling channels or portals, or you're going to have your own Amazon site, or you're going to do whatever on that end of it, and it's not something that I can realistically compete with in any real way because my margin is very different than what yours is, that can leave a really bad taste in my mouth. There's a lot of big publishers out there that I'm talking to when I say this. I'm not going to stop selling your product, but it makes it a lot harder for us to do what we do here as far as boots on the ground go. And when it comes to any game on the planet right now, if you lose the recruitment end that you're getting from brick and mortar because your games are very difficult to recruit on, you're going to suffer a lack of sales. That will happen. There isn't a game out there that won't get impacted by that. If brick and mortar decides to back away from a game, it's going to ripple, and there's no community out there that's going to be able to hold it up by itself. It doesn't matter what the game is. In summary, for consumers, desirable CCG offers an easy entry. great gameplay, strong collectability, and a sense of community. These are all things that I have no problem investing and putting time into if you can set the roadmap in a way that makes it so that it's equitable for both me and you to decide to do that. I can put the assets and the resources into that. I think if you're missing any of the key pieces that I talked about today, you're allowing yourself failure points that you don't need to. One of the other things that's critical, I think, is making sure that you have tournament software, a digital way for me to engage with a customer as far as recording results, getting data, whether it's emails or some way to contact players to let them know different things. Like we have events going on through a portal that's your own. The ability to be able to take a look at decks that are relevant from previous tournaments is important for us, and it's important for them as well to kind of get a gauge of what the meta is. So if you're not handling that on your own and you don't have a solid amount of content creators that are doing that heavy lifting for you, you should have software in there that's accessible for anybody to be able to take a look at. That's the other thing that you should consider. And a lot of times what I see is card games start to deal with that after success. And there's a bunch of things on this list that I feel like I see people trying to do after they've been successful, as opposed to let's start out and assume that we're going to be successful and we're going to put all these things into play to make sure that we're successful and give ourselves the best opportunity. So when it comes to the roadmap, I think I pretty clearly defined what that is. Again, we're not going to be here next week because it's Christmas, and believe it or not, the week after that it's New Year's. So I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, maybe New Year's Eve, we'll see. I hope everybody has a happy holiday. We're getting close on the 1 year anniversary of the show. So I think my next show will be sort of year in review. I think that's a pretty topical thing to do this time of year. And I'll go through some of the things that we've done this year that are a little bit different, some of the successes, some of the failures, that sort of stuff. Either way, everybody have a happy holidays, and I'll see you next time. Happy gaming.